muscle here, and then you've got this bursa that's underneath where a tendon comes and attaches. Here, so the bursa is underneath this tendon, and as you move your joint, that tendon, instead of directly rubbing up against the bone, it's going to have this synovial fluid in between to reduce friction. All right? So the point of the bursa is to reduce friction.
As a ton.
And it's dealing with a tendon. The reduced friction as two bones move against each other.
That would be the synovial cavity.
Yeah, that's going to be this joint cavity, and like bones actually don't really rub up against necessarily right up against each other, because where we have an articulation, granted that our articulating part of the bone is cartilage there, but you're going to have that synovial fluid right there in that joint cavity to reduce the friction there. But that's the joint cavity with the synovial membrane. So if you're good with that. So yeah, the answer for 6 is D. Other questions on this? All right, get out a piece of paper, no questions.
No.
Okay.
What's the smaller contraction used for the sarcoma? Is the smallest one?
Oh, okay.
Which one is
So now, if we think about muscle tissue, right? And we're really talking about skeletal muscle, right? So here you have a skeletal muscle fiber. But is the skeletal muscle fiber the smallest unit of contraction?
It's the muscle fiber, I think.
Is that the smallest unit of contraction? Sarcomere, is that the smallest unit of contraction? What is a sarcomere? Do we
From
even?
Z disc to Z disc, right?
Ah, yes. So you have this Z disc, right? And you have this other Z disc. So now I'm going to take like a little bitty bit of this and blow it up. Right here. This small little part of this muscle fiber I'm going to blow up and look at a sarcomere. What's in the middle of a sarcomere?
Actin and myosin.
Okay, so you got actin and myosin. Those are the two proteins that are the main proteins in a skeletal muscle fiber. And so you're going to have the thick filaments. Thick filaments are what? Myosin. And then the thin filaments are actin, right? And so, and these are going to be connected to your Z discs. Alright. And so these lines I drew here, that's actin on either side. And this, what I drew, which is from Z disc to Z disc, it's called a Z disc because these are actually, if you were to look at them, they're coins shaped, like a disc, coin shaped. And so from here to here, that is a sarcomere. And the myosin will have these heads on it. And the myosin heads will bind with the active site on actin, and then what happens when we're talking about a contraction? Sliding filament model, you guys remember that from AMP1? Sliding filament model? What happens?
Myosin heads bind to the actin.
And then the actin moves towards the center of the sarcomere in the M line, and that whole entire sarcomere contracts, gets small. That's the smallest contractile unit in skeletal muscle, is this sarcomere, okay? And so all along this skeletal muscle, you're gonna have these sarcomeres, and as they shorten, this whole muscle will shorten. And then you're gonna have a whole bunch of these muscle fibers bound together to make up a whole muscle. And so with muscle mechanics, whatever's happening with this sarcomere is gonna be reflected all the way up to the whole muscle. So when it shortens, the whole muscle shortens, okay? So that's the smallest contractile unit. If we look at the hierarchy, it's actually the sarcomere. Yes,
And the tendon is the same, dense regular.
right. So your
Both of them are
tendons and your ligaments are both dense, regular, meaning the collagen fibers are going in, they're parallel to one another. They're not going in opposite directions. The difference between a ligament and a tendon is what, Natasha?
Ligament, like bone to bone?
Right, a ligament's gonna connect bone to bone, where, Marquita, what does a tendon connect? Muscle to bone. But in both of these situations, the reason why you have dense regular is because pooling forces are happening here as you move those movable joints to move your skeleton, okay? A ligament is going to make it to where an articulation, it holds these bones together. That's what a ligament does, all right? And it creates stability at a joint. Tendon is going to connect a muscle to a bone. And the muscle itself, its muscle tone, will actually help with joint stability. Okay?
What about the system that is responsible for removable of a clot?
Okay, so what is, if we're thinking of repair of a blood vessel, right?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, what are the things that are gonna happen?
Vasospasm.
Vasospasm's the first thing that happens. Then what?
The platelet plug.
Platelet plug.
And then you have fibrin wrap.
And then you're going to have coagulation. And you could either have the intrinsic pathway or the extrinsic pathway occur, right? That's all dependent upon the severity of the damage, okay? If you're bleeding a lot, is that going to be the intrinsic or the extrinsic pathway that kicks in? Extrinsic, it's faster. But if it's just a little bit, it's not bleeding too much, you'll have the intrinsic. Both are going to lead into that common pathway, and you're going to form the end product, which is fiber. All right? Now, do we want this to keep being made? Instead, what do we end up doing here to get rid of it?
Lysis.
We lyse it. So the system that is going to get rid of a clot is
The
what?
fibrolytic.
Fibrinolytic.
Just want to make sure.
Now this is just repairing a blood vessel, but if we do like soft tissue damage, right?
Mhm.
We've broken a whole bunch of blood vessels, correct? And so if we're just thinking about soft tissue repair, what is going to be the first thing that's going to happen to start the healing process?
Inflammation.
Inflammation happens first. You want nutrients, stuff that's in the blood, to go into that extracellular matrix of that tissue that's been damaged. And once those nutrients start to get into that tissue, we're going to go into a phase of tissue repair called organization. And this is really where you do start to heal. The last step, so it's a 3-step process in soft tissue repair, is going to be the actual rebuilding of new tissue called regeneration. But part of this is not all that tissue. Whenever you damage tissue, depending upon the severity, you're going to have your body kind of try to reinforce it with collagen fibers. So you get this thing called fibrosis, which is a scar.
Tissue.
Yeah, it might not be visible, but you'll still have a thickening of that tissue because you have more collagen fiber than was there before. And so this is regeneration and fibrosis. The fibrosis part here is because of the collagen fibers. You have more of those, all right? So the end result of this is new tissue, or new cells, and scar, a scar. And that's from the collagen fibers. What is going to be the end result of inflammation before really full on going into this organization?
Macrophages come in and they.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the inflammation, you're going to have pain, there's going to be redness, you're going to have swelling going on, right? All this is happening because you're increasing the vascular permeability, you're having vasodilation occur, you're promoting the bringing of leukocytes, right? But the other thing that you're going to get at the end of this, before really getting into this, is a scab, all right? Because during inflammation, this is what's happening. This is a part of the inflammation because you're bleeding, but you want to stop that bleeding, all right? So not only are you making it so stuff goes there, but you got to realize you want to stop the bleeding at the same time. So you're going to end up with a scab at the end here. But in organization, this is where we really start to heal. And so we've torn a blood vessel. So in organization, yes, here we're going to have macrophages cleaning up any debris, right? Clean up of debris. But the big thing is you're going to start to rebuild blood vessels. And the rebuilding of these blood vessels is called granulation. And you're going to get also little fibers here as well. So you know when you pull a scab, right? Sometimes you see those little teeny fibers. The little fibers that you're seeing when you pull off that scab is part of this granulation tissue. And that's what's being formed with organization. Now, if you pull off that scab before this has finished what it's doing, you're going to pull blood vessels that are starting to be rebuilt, and you're going to bleed again. All right? So when you pick that scab and you see those little fibers, that's the granulation tissue. And when you start to bleed, it's because you didn't give your body enough time to get to this next step. All right? But if you pull off that scab and it's pinkish looking, that's the scar that you're seeing. And that's the collagen fibers. That extra reinforcement. All right? Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
All right. Now, if we were to stick, so this is soft tissue repair. So let's think of, let's put down here, bone repair. What is the very, very first thing that happens in bone repair? Think about this, it's inflammation, right? But what do we call it when we have this excess fluid building up in bone repair that creates sort of like a bump?
Hematoma?
It's a hematoma, right? But hematoma in bone repair is analogous to what's going on in inflammation. Is everybody good with that? Now the second part of bone repair, now when we're thinking about building bone, what is built before the bone? Cartilage is built before bone. Bone always chases cartilage. Okay, cartilage is formed first. That's also what's going to happen in bone repair. Your bone, as it's healing itself and making new bone tissue, you're going to first have cartilage be built. Okay? So you're going to have what's called a fibrocartilaginous callus form. Okay? View this as this organization here. All right? You're starting to build a template again. All right? You're building this hyaline template that's going to get replaced by bone. And so you get a bony callus. That's this. You're getting regeneration of the tissue that was there before. All right? The one thing that is an addition in bone repair is because our bone, our skeleton, is supporting us. It's supporting all that other soft tissue. And so the final thing in bone repair is going to be dependent upon the forces that are put upon it. And so that's bone remodeling. That's going to determine how thick that bone is in the end as it's healing. Okay? Is everybody good with that? So 1, 2, and 3 are analogous to 1, 2, and 3 here in soft tissue repair.
What about the origin for fat of a fat emboli from a bone fracture?
Okay. So let's think about just bone in general, right? If we were to talk about the structure of a long bone. These ends, think of the ends being sort of like they're above the rest of the bone. So they're the physical part that's above the rest of the bone. What does above mean in Latin terms? Epi, right? Epithelium. Epithelium means tissue. So epithelium is the tissue that's above all other tissues. These are the epiphyses. This is the physical part that's above. So we have an epiphyses. Epiphysis. When you draw a circle, what's the length across that circle called? Dia, right? And diameter, because that's the length across a circle. This shaft of a long bone is the part that goes across. You can think of it as analogous to the diameter here. So it's this physical part that's going across. So that's why they call it diaphysis. Okay? This area here at the epiphysis, what is it made up of? What type of bone? Cancellous, which is spongy. We've got spongy bone here. And then this diaphysis has these columns of bone, right? Has these bunches of these columns of bone. But if we were to take a cross-section of one of these columns and look at it, we would actually see that it has these rings to it. You guys remember this? That's an osteon. So the osteon are these columns that have layers upon layers of bone making up this column of bone. But this is going to be able to resist like pushing forces, twisting forces, all these forces that are being put on that long bone, right? So, and it's close. This bone is really dense compared to the spongy bone, which is very porous, like a sponge. So this part that makes up this is compact, because it's dense. And the structural unit of compact bone is the osteon. I don't know how to spell this, but these like struts that make up the spongy part. Yeah. Trabeculae, that's the structural unit of spongy, okay? And it's taking on pressure as well. So now I'm just going over just the basic structure of a bone, first of all. Now, all around this, we're going to see sort of sheets of bone going around all of this, all right? So I have this bone here, and then I could take pieces of paper. Like, let's say this is my bone right here, this pen. And then I could take several sheets of paper, and they would wrap all the way around this bone. So that's going to be on the outside, all around on the outside of the bone, or the cortex of this bone. These plates of bone all around the bone is called cortical bone. That might be a new term for you. So then you have cortical bone, which is all of these plates that surround all the rest of it. So then there's cortical. Now, as we're growing, our bones are going to get longer. And that's because at the ends between the epiphysis and the diaphysis, there's a growth plate. That's made up of hyaline cartilage. And so there's going to be layers within this growth plate of these cartilage cells getting big, making more of themselves, and then dying and getting replaced by bone, all right, as this bone lengthens. Now when we're growing in this medullary cavity region, that marrow, is it red? are yellow as we're growing. It's red as we're growing because we need a lot of oxygen to make ATP to build new tissue as we're growing. So when we're a little kid, in this medullary cavity, we have red marrow. But as we get older, we don't need to have as much production of erythrocytes because we're not growing anymore. Now we're going to maintain the body. And what type of tissue is great at storing high energy bonds? Fat, right? Fat is great at storing high energy bonds. And so this marrow, as an adult in this medullary cavity, becomes yellow, all right, when we become adults. So if you break this bone, what gets released? Fat from that. And granted, I will tell you this, when you break a bone, initially it's going to have yellow marrow. But then that fat gets released from the bone and it can go into circulation and it becomes a circulating thing of fat from that yellow marrow that can get lodged in different places, in particular the lungs, and it becomes a fat emboli that can happen. It's not like this happens all the time, please. But if we break a bone, so we break this bone, this fat in this yellow marrow can go out into the bloodstream, all right, and become an emboli that's traveling through the bloodstream. But at the same rate, when we break a bone, yeah, it's this yellow marrow at first, but it will revert to red marrow because we need to make a bunch of ATP to repair this bone. So the emboli is coming from yellow bone marrow. I don't know if that, is that an option?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then 22 is kind of confusing because
Okay, what is that one as?
I think there's two answers up. What is this identification? Has chest pain, difficulty breathing a day after breaking a bone? One option is fat emboli and the other is pulmonary emboli, which both are.
Right, the
correct.
fat emboli will become a pulmonary emboli. So I don't know what
put
I had.
Pulmonary emboli because of.
Yeah, I was gonna say the best answer there is a pulmonary emboli because that's what the fat emboli will become.
Mhm.
I don't know what I ended up putting in. What number is that?
22?
22. Okay, I will, whenever I post these up, I will, or I'll send out an email and I'll make that correction saying, well, it's a pulmonary emboli that originated from a fat emboli. So in this situation, if I had it on an exam, they would both be correct. For 22, B and C would be correct in that situation. If I said, what is the origin? You know, but I mean, I wouldn't,
You, that question.
I'd change that question, it'd be a bad question, I'd give B and C the correct answer here, the way it's written. Okay, non-structural scoliosis is like, you know, like maybe one leg is bigger or you're in a stressful situation. And so you know, like if one leg is bigger, you might just change your posture to fix it. But it's non-structural, where scoliosis, the structural type, is a progressive disease and can get worse and worse. And that's actually where you will have damage to the vertebra there, okay? So in this situation, since we're talking about non-structural scoliosis, that's 29. First of all, it's not progressive. It is not caused, the second one is an infection. An infection is not the cause of that. That's more like posture, emotional state might give you that S shape to your spine at a particular time. And it is easily resolved by just bending to that affected side, but it's not actual structural damage to the vertebra. That is structural scoliosis. So C is incorrect for non-structural, but it's correct for structural, all right?
What about B? You said it, so it would be the correct answer would be B,
Osteomyelitis
right?
is
Bone
when you
infection.
get an infection in bone.
But, so there's two correct answers for that question, because osteomyelitis, it would not be caused. It
What
says
is the
incorrect.
incorrect? Oh, I guess osteomyelitis does cause it. I guess that is a cause of it, sorry.
Okay.
So that one's B and C?
No, it's just C.
Just C?
Just C. Osteomyelitis does cause non-structural. But it's a temporary thing. I mean, osteomyelitis is where you have an infection of bone, which could cause you to have a slight curvature of your spine at that time. The answer there is C. So, let me go over here and let's write down all the bone diseases we need, and we'll start off with Paget's, talking about it. Or like bone disorders. Everybody good with this? Okay. Okay. So Paget's, that's a bone disease, right? So let's put that one down first. Talk about that one first. What other bone disorders? What? Say that again, say it louder. Scoliosis. That's like more of a joint, maybe, but yeah, let's just write it down anyways. What the heck? Oh, I think I spelled this wrong. Is that how you spell it, or is there an E somewhere in there?
No.
And I'll tell you. C-O. C, oh, there's an O here. Okay. I think I spelled it wrong on my thing. Okay, is that how it's spelled? Okay, cool. And this is just an S curvature of this spine, like it's not curved properly. It's a sideways curvature. That's a good way to describe it. So, you know, you got the spine here, this is like a sideways curvature.
And that is lordosis, right?
That's the
Okay,
hunchback,
now,
right?
that's something different. So you have, this is scoliosis S curvature. This is looking at it like back here, right? Be off to the side. It's a lateral curvature. And then you have lordosis, and I see where you're seeing this, but you gotta realize you're looking at it in a different way off to the side now, like going this way. You see what I'm saying? So if you were looking off to the side, lordosis is where the lower back is, you know how people walk like, I can't do it, but like this? They have their back like that?
Or like you see like
Like,
the
yeah,
really
like
skinny
the
people who
cushion.
have like their lower back is kind of like
Yeah.
pushed forward, like it's a curve.
Yeah, but they walk like this. Have you ever seen like old men walking like this? That's lordosis, walking like that. Now, when they have a hump like this and they're kind of arched like this, seen that one, right?
Like a hunchback.
That's kyphosis, all right? So lordosis is walking like this. So abnormal lower back curvature. Where kyphosis is upper. And when I say back, I mean the vertebra are compromised. This particular one is associated with a bone disease called what? Happens more in women than men.
Osteoporosis.
So this is where the bone density decreases, so the bone becomes porous. You think of it as being, more holy. And then it can't take on as much weight, and so the way that it's compromised is they curve that upper back like that. Then then you have osteopenia, and these are connected, but they're based on a T-score. What does T-score measure?
Bone mineral density.
Bone mineral density. And so a T-score less than what number means osteoporosis?
Like 2.5 or something.
Minus, this is key, minus 2.5. Means really low, right? Osteopenia is going to be minus a T-score, so these are T-scores, -1 to eek, minus 2.4, or 2.5. So like, and this is a range. That's what I'm trying to get that in there is a range. It's not like a calculation. And then obviously, anything above -1, you're not considered here. But granted, approaching -1 means you're losing bone mineral density. Females are more prone to this when we go through menopause because estrogen is important in building bone tissue. And we stop making as much estrogen as we did when we go through menopause. What is the,
How about multiple myeloma?
okay, so then you have, now we're talking about cancers, or,
Is that the same as
this
plasma cell
isn't really a
myeloma?
bone disease though, multiple myeloma. It's instead what kind of cancer? You've already seen this before, I called it something else.
Plasma cell
No.
myeloma?
George had asked if it was also called this, and then I did say it was also called this. But it's not dealing with bone, actually, it's dealing with white blood cells. It's a white blood cell malignancy. And so this is where you're getting plasma cells. More plasma cells than necessary are being made, right?
Wasn't there like a dysfunction between like the osteoprogenitor cells and like the osteoblast and osteoclast where you have more osteoclastic activity than osteoblastic activity?
Okay, you do have cancer of bone,
Mm-hmm.
all right? And that is going to be dealing with bone tissue and bone cells.
Mhm.
This is not bone tissue. This is a white blood cell malignancy, okay? But they do talk about it in this chapter. And the reason why is because this particular one, multiple myeloma, is not a circulating one, like all the other white blood cell malignancies. It is only with the bone. It happens just in the bone. It's associated with the bone, right? It doesn't go outside of the bone. It stays in that bone marrow, all right?
So what's the cause of like the lytic bone lesions? Like the Swiss cheese look that you have?
Now, lytic bone lesions, that is, that could be, okay, then we have different cancers. So we can have benign one and we can have malignant ones.
Mhm.
So then we have these cancers. Now, the lytic bone one, I'm trying to remember, I can't get it in my head, that exact one, but you do have one that has a hard shell
Mhm.
around when this is happening. And then there's a whole bunch of them. So let's list them all right now.
So,
Okay.
but is it related to multiple myeloma? Those
No,
lesions?
multiple myeloma is this plasma cell, a whole bunch
Mhm.
crowding that bone marrow and having bone pain. Okay?
Okay.
This is a white blood cell malignancy. It's not actual osteoblasts or osteocytes or even cartilage cells involved. But they have it here because it is local to bone tissue. Okay? But we have benign, I might have spelled that wrong, and malignant ones. Malignant ones are going to have sarcoma in the name, right?
Or myeloma too, right? Because most myeloma is
Myeloma,
considered
this is
malignant.
white blood cells. This is separate. This is not bone.
It's in your PowerPoint though.
I know, but I'm telling you now, it is not really a bone cancer. It's not a cancer of bone cells themselves. It is a white blood cell malignancy that we've already talked about, and I also say in that PowerPoint, please see, I don't know, chapter 11,
Mhm.
where we actually talk about this one. It's the plasma cell myeloma,
Okay.
okay? All right, it's actually a white blood cell malignancy. It's in this chapter because it's restricted to occurring only in the bone. So it's a little bit different than all the other white blood cell malignancies because it stays in the bone. It doesn't circulate, all right?
Osteomyelitis,
The other ones that we have in here,
osteomyelitis.
we have osteochondroma. I'm gonna put them down the way I have them.
Okay.
Find these ones. Chondroma. Osteoid, osteoma. And then this giant cell tumor. These are all benign. This one, however, can very quickly metastasize. Where these are benign, they're not going to really go necessarily outside of where they are locally, you know? It's a benign tumor in your bone, probably cause some pain and stuff. So it's gonna stay in that area. The giant cell tumor one, however, even though it might not have a malignant cell structure type per se, it's gonna metastasize because it's associated with a lot of blood vessels. So it will leave this site. So this one, it easily metastasizes. And this one also will quickly go into a sarcoma. All right? But when it's just this giant cell tumor, it's benign. This one is gonna be like, to just break it down in like studying wise, this osteochondroma is gonna be growth plate, where the growth plate is. This one is gonna be medullary cavity, that's where it's located. This one is the one that has that hard shell, like around it. So it's sort of like, this particular tumor will be surrounded by a hard shell. Hard shell. Then we have these malignant ones. And all of the malignant ones, yeah, we got this multiple myeloma, but that's really a white blood cell malignancy. But these rest of these malignant ones, the big thing about these, when you think of malignant, that means malignant is it's metastasizing. It's leaving that site of origin, right? All of these are malignant because they go to what organ in the body? They're gonna go to the lung, actually. All of these bone malignant cancers will travel to the lung, all right?
So on the way to the lungs, would it hit the heart first?
I don't know why, but obviously there's something about lung tissue that these bone cells, when they actually have so many mutations occur in them, when they go out into the bloodstream, that lung tissue has something that it can set up shop,
Okay.
all right? And so whenever we think of like neoplasia, and when they become malignant or metastasize or go outside of where they originated, a lot of them don't end up finding a new home. But in these bone cancers, there's something about lung tissue that allows them to set up shop there and grow in lung tissue, okay? So there's some type of, and that those cells of the lung, there is something on the outside that's making it to where these bone cells are happy. It could very well be the simple fact that there's maybe a lot of blood vessels there. I don't entirely know the reason why. Yeah, chondrosarcoma. And then the last one is this Ewing. Sarcoma. This one and the Ewing are fast. The chondrosarcoma is a slow progression. And all of them are going to go to lung tissue when they metastasize. So there's the cancers. But hey, what are the three parts towards neoplasias? What has to happen first?
Mutation?
A mutation, which we call, what is the part? There's three. You have 1, 2, 3, right? I think you said it.
Initiation?
Right. Initiation. I'm spelling this wrong. Seems like way too many I's in there. But initiation is first. This is where you're just having mutations occur, right? You don't have cancer yet. Just have mutations. And then, what happens next? What? Proliferation, where we call this is, what is this part called when we're doing proliferation?
Promotion.
Promotion. And that's where you actually have proliferation occurring. This is where you're making more and more and more of that cell. And so in this situation, you've had 6+ mutations, right? And in particular, what genes have been affected for proliferation to occur?
The genes controlling mitosis.
Correct. And those genes that control mitosis are
Oncogenes.
proto-oncogenes. So here's where you've had a proto-oncogene it's been mutated. And now you're not controlling mitosis and you're getting proliferation occur. All right? The final thing, which is where we're really actually going into becoming cancer, is progression. And in this situation, those cells have anaplasia. Okay? They no longer look like themselves, they no longer function like themselves.
The difference between neoplasia, anaplasia, and dysplasia.
Neoplasia is the overall term we use for cancer. Neoplasia, cancer. Anaplasia is going to be where it's no longer differentiated. So let's say you have a muscle cell. It no longer looks like a muscle cell. Dysplasia is going to be anaplasia, but it doesn't even function even close. That's where it's non-functional at all at that point. We never really went into the distinguishing differences between anaplasia and dysplasia, honestly.
And metaplasia is where it differentiates into a different cell type, but it's still functional.
Right. That is correct. That's where you have PCCE in the lungs, but then it can turn into stratified squamous because it has different pressures being put upon it. So it changes its cell shape to accommodate those new demands being put upon it. Good question. Now, what is it whenever, so this is bone mineral density. This is where it's getting coarse. What is it whenever the bones don't calcify at all? What is that called? It's called rickets in kids. Osteomalacia is what it's called in adults. This is going to be where the bone doesn't become calcified at all. Are we missing any here?
Do we have to worry about bone lytic lesions? Because we were talking about it a little bit and then we didn't go over that.
Right now, no, because
Okay.
I don't have that in my brain.
That's fine.
Like, the thing about bone lytic lesions is you got necrosis going on. Let's talk about it that way. You have bone tissue that's dying. Because we're talking about lysis of bone. So bone lytic lesions is dealing with
The lysis of bone tissue.
the lysis of bone tissue, and that's going to be a result of ischemia could cause that. You're not getting any nutrients there. Also an infection.
Okay.
Now let's talk about Paget's. All right? So what happens in Paget's disease, there's a two-step process. The first process of Paget's disease is a decrease in the production of bone tissue. So the bones we have today are not going to be the same exact bones that we have a year from now. They get replaced, those cells. Everything turns over, just like our hair grows. Our bones will turn over. right? But in Paget's disease, the turning over of that bone will decrease initially. And so in this situation, you're gonna have osteoclasts are outpacing osteoblasts. Does everybody get that? So osteoclasts are outpacing osteoblasts. That's why you get a decrease in bone production, because the bone cells that are breaking down bone are doing that faster than the bone that's laying down the bone. That's the first part of Paget's. But as it progresses, then you're going to see abnormal bone structure where osteoblasts are outpacing osteoclasts. And so what this ends up doing, and this is local. Paget's disease is fairly local. It's not like an overall, like it's not happening with all of your bones when this happens. It's just like one bone will do this initially. And so like, for example, here's your normal bone. And then the first thing that's going to happen is this bone will get porous. Because these osteoclasts are outpacing the osteoblasts, right? And then the next thing is you will get this abnormal bone structure where the osteoblasts are outpacing the osteoclasts, and really what ends up happening in this situation is you get this crowding of the medullary cavity with actual bone tissue. So these osteoblasts are laying down bone, but they're laying it in a disorganized fashion, and they're making it to where that medullary cavity has spongy bone within it. And then that increases the size of that particular bone. And then those people with this disease, that increased size of that bone and that extra pressure is extremely painful. That's Paget's.
So
I don't know what the correct answer is. Do we know what the correct answer is now from my explanation?
would it be like increase in B or bone resorption?
Yes. Yes. B is correct, because resorption, remember, is the breakdown of bone, and bone deposition is the building of bone. That happens later. So here, yeah, this is where you have, that's an increase of bone resorption. And then this here is an increase in bone deposition, but it's abnormal. That's the important part of this, because you're creating all this spongy bone in that medullary cavity of that person.
I don't think tuberculosis.
Oh, okay, yeah, tuberculosis is another funky one. Like this one's funky, this multiple myeloma. This is really a white blood cell neoplasia. Tuberculosis So tuberculosis is going to be an infection. And the site of infection is where?
Lungs.
Stress on the lungs.
Lungs. But it can move to bone. And so that would be a situation where the site of infection is not the same as the portal of entry. All right? So if we're thinking about infectious diseases like tuberculosis, we have, what's the very first thing that happens with that? If we're talking about this link of things in an infectious disease. Not the progression, but just the links in an infectious disease.
Like a portal of entry,
Portal
by
of
like
entry.
inhalation or something.
Inhalation.
Portal of entry is one chain of events. That's what it is, chain of events. But what is before portal of entry?
Inhalation.
Reservoirs?
Reservoir. And then we'll have a portal of entry, such as the digestive system, the respiratory system, skin, okay, that kind of stuff. But the actual way that this infectious agent can compromise a victim is mode of transmission. And what were the modes of transmission?
Inhalation.
Ingestion, inhalation, penetration, direct contact. I think that's all of them, huh? I think that's all of them. Those are the modes. For tuberculosis, what would it be? Inhalation. And then we have portal of exit. And then the other thing that's a part of this chain is the susceptibility of the victim. Of a victim. And so that's going into those infectious diseases. That is different than the pathogenesis of infectious diseases, right? Where we have like the prodromal stage, the acute stage, the convalescent stage. That's the pathogenesis, okay? Everybody good with that? I don't know if there's other ones.
Muscular dystrophy.
Okay, now that's a muscle one. Okay, so these are all bone. And then we have muscular dystrophy. And that's dealing with muscle. But what are some of the other muscle ones we have?
Myasthenia gravis.
Yes. I might have spelled that wrong.
That's great.
Oh, and then there's this other one, I don't have to spell it correctly, but you can spell it. I think that's how you spell it. So, in this one, the cell membrane of a muscle can get compromised. And when that happens, and this is from blood trauma. This one's from blood trauma. This one is, what is the etiology here? For muscular dystrophy. So this one is a physical agent, right? The etiology is a physical agent. Genetic. This is genetic. And then this one is what? That one's funky.
The myasthenia gravis, isn't that a hypersensitivity?
Autoimmune.
It's an immune one. It's an immunological dysfunction of the immune system. Remember at the very, very beginning, we had all those different etiologies? So this one is immune system dysfunction. Right, and it is hypersensitivity. Which one?
2
2. And hypersensitivity 2
receptors are blocked.
is, so we have allergies, right? The allergy one is hypersensitivity 1, and then we have the contact dermatitis, which is hypersensitivity 4, which we could kind of put as an allergy, but that's where we're having a hapten penetrate that skin. And then we have a chronic disease is hypersensitivity 3. And so when we think of hypersensitivity 2, what is a general thing we think of with this one?
Tissue specific?
It's tissue specific. Yes. So this one we're familiar with, right? This one is new. And then this one, it depends upon your AMP1 instructor if they got around to talking about this. So I'll first start with this one. Dystrophy. It's called that because in people who have muscular dystrophy, they're not able to make a protein called dystrophin.
Are there like 12 types of muscular dystrophy?
Yes, there are different types. I'm just going to talk about it in general right now, okay? Because the big thing and why it's called this is because these people can't make this protein. And this protein is important with maintaining cell membrane integrity of a skeletal muscle, okay? So they can't make this protein. So their cell membranes of all their skeletal muscles are compromised. So, here's our skeletal muscle. And so let's think of this little D here would be that protein. It's going to help maintain that cell membrane. But with people with muscular dystrophy, they can't make this protein, and so their cell membrane is compromised. And what ends up happening is since it's compromised, fat and connective tissue get into that muscle cell. And so those people are not able, because their skeletal muscle is not able to maintain that cell membrane, this connective tissue goes into the muscle cell, and they end up not being able to use that muscle. And so they aren't able to contract their skeletal muscles. And that's why people that have muscular dystrophy, you'll see them in wheelchairs. And they also end up dying very young because the diaphragm is a skeletal muscle, which eventually becomes compromised and they will die of respiratory failure. Everybody good with that? This one we're familiar with, right? So what's the big deal about this one? What's being compromised here with the muscle?
The acetylcholine receptors are being blocked by anti-acetylcholine something.
So then in this one, that's correct. In this one, we'll have this axon terminal of a nerve that's supposed to excite this muscle here, but instead, those acetylcholine receptors here an antibody blocks acetylcholine from binding to that chemically gated ion channel. So an antibody comes, attaches to the chemically gated ion channel that acetylcholine would bind to. And so if acetylcholine can't bind to that chemically gated ion channel, what is not going to be able to happen in this skeletal muscle cell?
Excitation.
Right, it can't get depolarized. So in this one, it can't get depolarized, it can't get excited, so it can't contract. We get muscle weakness. This one, blunt trauma, so there's something else going on here. So this one here is describing that. This one is describing that, with this little skeletal muscle. And then blunt trauma comes around, and what you'll see is this cell membrane will get compromised here. And you'll get bleeding, because you bump up against something, okay? So you bump up against something, you compromise this skeletal muscle, you tear blood vessels, and then blood from those torn blood vessels goes into the cell itself, and you start to get an accumulation of calcium in this muscle. And then that prevents the muscle from being able to contract as well, because you get this ossification. Too much calcium really is what ends up happening here as blood is going into that muscle from that blunt trauma. Are you guys good with that? So this particular chapter brings up quite a bit of stuff that we've gone over. And I made a list of some stuff. It talks about inflammation, cell injury, edema, coagulation, ischemia, necrosis, pyogenic infection, chronic disease, infectious diseases. We get into neoplasia again with this chapter, and hypersensitivities as well. So I don't know how you guys approached this weekend, if you actually attempted to look back at whole chapters with this or not. But for me, in making the exam 4, I'm going to really look at this chapter to reintroduce new things. And remember that exam 4 is a take-home, okay? Let me look through and see if there's stuff that, okay, there is one thing that we didn't talk about that I want to just kind of bring up, and that is the severity. Does everybody feel good with those grades that they put in regards to a ligament being torn? Everybody's good with that? No? Because you have 3 grades. You have grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3, right? Grade 1 is mild. That's where you just stretched. Just had a stretch occur. But with that one, you're maintaining the stability there. It's not like you've compromised the stability of a joint in that situation. You've just stretched ligaments and tendons, okay? Grade 2, you now have created a situation where that joint is unstable. And the reason is because those collagen fibers are torn, all right? But they're not completely all torn. You still have some that are intact. That's 2. And then 3 is where they're all torn, all right? So it's pretty, they're stretched. Some are torn, some are not torn. And then the most severe, they're all torn, okay? Everybody's good with the fractures? The different types of fractures, being able to see, there could be a few new ones here, like avulsion. That might be a new fracture that you've never seen from AMP 1, where you actually have a piece of a bone that's separated from the bone. But for the most part, I think all of them are ones that you saw when you took AMP 1. Do you guys have any questions about pain? Because the quiz will cover pain as well today. And so we have 10 more minutes until quiz time. I don't think I'm gonna do that this time. No, what? I had like a word thing there. We could do one of two things for this last 10 minutes before taking the quiz. You can ask me questions about pain or any other last minute things that you want to like truly understand before taking the quiz. Or we could do a word bank over here as a group. How about we start with the word bank, and then if any questions come up, we can address those. I'll keep up those diseases up there. Who's any of this? What's that? Or I could do a word bank here.